It's me again. All right. So, second video on responses to laissez-faire capitalism and the fact that in the 1800s it pretty much sucked. So let's keep rolling. So the next response that we see after utopian socialism, Robert Owen, and all those cool changes that he made is Marxism. So guys, of course, we know a little bit already about Marxism. We know who Karl Marx is. So Marxism refers to that far left radical ideology. It's named after Karl Marx. Marx didn't call it Marxism. In fact, he called it communism. There's another term that we should know when it comes to this idea of Marxism or communism, and that is the idea of scientific socialism. Now, what is the science that is behind this socialism? Well, if you would have looked at it already, which you should have, you would have had a gander at the study that Frederick Angle did in industrial Manchester in 1844. In this sociological study, Frederick Angle outlines the living conditions for the working class in the city of Manchester in that year, and it paints a pretty bleak picture. So this picture that Engels paints, that eventually Marx comes to read, and then they meet up and become friends, it characterizes this idea of class warfare, class struggle, right? This dynamic between the rich and the poor, and how the rich want to hold on to what they have and how the poor want to get what these guys over here have. And eventually it leads to problems. So Marx said the only way to change society, and we've looked at this already, is through violent revolution. Because let's face it, we know those who have what they need, what they want, aren't going to just give it up and, hand it over to the poor in society. So this is Karl Marx. At some point in my life, when I stopped giving a shit, I'm going to probably look like that. I'm just going to let myself go. Now, guys, Marx speaks about, and we've looked at this again, this is kind of a quick review, this idea of the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. We have a picture here of who the bourgeoisie are. You can see it right here, the people with their fancy hats and their fancy dresses, having their grand balls where they would eat and drink and dance all night. It was a pretty amazing life for this group of individuals. So these were the haves. This is the so-called 1% that we hear people talking about today. And these people lived a pretty amazing life during the Industrial Revolution. Alternatively, we of course have this group called the proletariat. Just look at those faces. Nary a smile to be seen. So these are the 99%, these are the have-nots, these are the workers, and their life was terrible, and we know this already. Now, we have a beautiful quote from Karl Marx. He says, "Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite." So at the top of the slide, it talks about how Marx believed that conflict in society was inevitable. And we've touched upon this prior to us breaking off because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I asked you the question before, how long can you kick a person and keep them down before they eventually decide to start fighting back? So that's why it was inevitable, because of the oppression that was put upon the proletariat by the bourgeoisie. Eventually something had to give. And once that something gives, then we will see the proletariat rising up against the bourgeoisie, and we will see violent revolution. Now, the often forgotten about individual, and I mean, who would want to forget that face? But he's not talked about as much, which is quite sad actually, because he was a large contributor to the success of Marxism. And that individual there on the screen is, of course, Frederick Angle, another beautiful beard of history. So Engels, also a German, much like Karl Marx. Engels writes his study of the English working class in 1844 in Manchester. Marx reads it, and Marx is stunned by what he reads, and he's like, I got to meet this guy. So they become pen pals, and eventually they meet. 4 years later, they're publishing the Communist Manifesto. If you want an interesting read, just, because you're bored right now, go online and search the Communist Manifesto, and you can find PDF copies of it and stuff like that. But in the Communist Manifesto, basically, what we get here is a rundown of the exploitive nature of capitalist economic systems. And basically the answer that Marx and Engels have is, well, if capitalism is the problem, then we need to destroy capitalism. And the idea of Marxism, of course, it took foothold in the Soviet Union, or would become the Soviet Union. Originally, it was called Russia, right? In 1917, we see the Russian Revolution. About 4 years after the revolution, 1921, we see the formation of the Soviet Union, where republics that are surrounding the Soviet Union join with them republics surrounding Russia join with them to form the Soviet Union. And then in 1949, we see revolution in China under the banner of communism, and then China turns into a Marxist state under Chairman Mao. In 1950, we see communist ideals spread to North Korea under Kim Il-sung. And then in the 1950s, we see Cuba have a revolution against capitalism. And then very soon thereafter, too, we see revolution in Vietnam. So it's not like the ideological importance of communism can be downplayed. Communism or socialism, they were seen as major ideological alternatives for a massive proportion of the working or of the world during the 1950s, 60s, and to be honest, even in the 1970s. And that's because the life of most people was very difficult, and communism, it gave people hope. It made people believe that there could be something different out there in the world, rather than the life of exploitation that they're living. Now, in this particular chart, sorry, let me just move my box down if I can. I can't, so I'll just move the screen down. Okay, you have to bear with me here. Sorry, I apologize. There we go. So it says the evolution of society according to Marx. So number one, capitalism emerges from feudalism. So we have capitalism, classical liberalism emerging from classical conservatism. That's what we're talking about when we talk about feudalism. Eventually, the system of capitalism will be so exploitive that violence will occur between the exploiters and the exploited. The exploited we call the proletariat, and of course the proletariat are going to win. From here we get the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Once that happens, we have the means of production being communally owned, and at that point we have economic equality. At that point we have achieved classlessness. From here, social classes will be gone, and then people start to work for societal good rather than their own personal gain. And then lastly, we see the state withering away. That's what it says at the bottom there, and I apologize for that popping up. The state withers away, and at that point we achieve statelessness. Now, we've only ever gotten to about right here, and we've discussed why we've never actually seen a full-blown Marxist revolution, and the answer always comes down to human greed. Once the people who are supposedly doing it for the good of the revolution, right, the revolutionaries carrying the flag, once they get that power and they get all the things associated with power, they don't want to give it up. Right? So as pure as these revolutions start off as, the corruptibility of humans is always a factor that sees the revolutions not actually going as far as Marx wanted them to, which is an interesting case study of human nature. And then on this last slide here, ladies and gentlemen, please check out the link in here. I know that in the PowerPoint in the previous module. It tells you how long to watch for, right? Where to start from, where to end at. But yeah, check it out and let me know if you need anything. So we're going to keep the videos rolling here today because, yeah, let's just get them done. All right. Peace, guys. Stay Corona safe.